talk about artists and their self-portraits, which is a pretty interesting topic. We're going to go all the way back to the Renaissance in Germany, where we look at Albert Dürer. He's a German Renaissance artist, which took place in the early 16th century, so we're talking early 1500s, a little bit before our famous Ninja Turtle Renaissance artists, of course, that being Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Leonardo. But he was really prolific and did lots of self-portraits and did it in a couple different mediums, so I thought we would go ahead and take a look at his work. This one, of course, is an etching, so he made that on a plate of metal and then printed it. And here is actually a remarkable oil painting that's quite a bit ahead of his time. So you can see the expression, you can see his incredible use of the medium, and yet another oil painting by Albert Dürer of himself. Now we're going to go look at some by Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. So you guys are probably fairly familiar with Leonardo da Vinci, very famous Renaissance artist. He was a painter, he was an inventor, he was a playwright, he was a military strategist, all-around remarkable guy. And as you can see, that's kind of like what he looked like when he was kind of old, and that's what he looked like when he was really old. Now I got a story about the next painting I'm going to show you. The painting on the left was painted by Raphael. It is called School of Athens. It is a painting that actually hangs up in the Pope's house. This painting right now is in the Pope's house. You can tell it's very Renaissance. You can tell by the showing off of linear perspective or the accurate portrayal of space. You can tell, see the Apollo and Athena in the background, the god of art and music, the goddess of wisdom and truth. And this is a painting of all the famous Greek and Roman philosophers or great thinkers. And actually, Raphael snuck himself in this painting as a famous Greek artist. There he is chilling. So that's an interesting approach to self-portrait, is adding yourself to a story that you want to be part of. Next, we're going to go and look at some Baroque self-portraits. Baroque followed Renaissance, 1600s were the time. Caravaggio's shocking paintings were realistic and sublime. Let's not forget dear Rembrandt, master of shadow and light. With his brush and motion, Baroque was at its height. Okay, so there's Rembrandt. Very young Rembrandt. About my age Rembrandt. And old Rembrandt. He painted quite a few self-portraits. Very realistic, very representational. Also very moody and very dark. Kind of like lit by a candle. That's called tenebros. Tenebros is the kind of lighting they use in most, if not all, Baroque paintings. But let's go ahead and look at Caravaggio. Michelangelo Caravaggio is one of my favorite artists. You want to study up on him? He lived a pretty wild life and was a very, very wonderful painter and just cool to learn about. So that's what he looks like. This is actually a portrait of Caravaggio as Dionysus, or the god of wine, Bacchus, in the Roman tradition. And here's another painting of Dionysus or Bacchus. Now this is not Caravaggio being depicted as Bacchus, but in the jug of wine, in the bottom left-hand corner, in the reflection, see where it's circled? You can see Caravaggio's face. He painted his reflection in the wine bottle just to show off how talented he was. And he was talented enough to do that. So, mad props to Caravaggio for being able to handle a paintbrush. Moving on, we got Diego Velázquez. Diego Velázquez was a Spanish Baroque artist, where Rembrandt and Caravaggio were from Italy. And here he is painting himself in the painting that he's painting. You see, that is Velázquez standing behind the canvas working on it. So that's a rather humorous way to throw yourself into a painting for sure. Now we got modern European masters. Courbet, wonderful artist. Been learning about him lately. Very shock and awe. Kind of reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean Johnny Depp, doesn't it? Of course, you guys are probably familiar with Vincent van Gogh. I know Miss Laster likes to talk about him. This is pre-ear surgery and post-ear surgery. He painted a ton of self-portraits as well. And this one's really interesting. You can see the Japanese scroll hanging up behind him on the right. He was highly influenced by Japanese artwork, and there he is showing off that it's hanging up in his house while he paints the self-portrait. Paul Cézanne, another remarkable post-impressionist artist, really kind of responsible for coming up with the idea of multiple perspective that we will talk about when we talk about Pablo Picasso. Paul Gauguin, also a very revolutionary artist, kind of ahead of his time, kind of crazy. This painting you see him both with apples, a halo, and a snake. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on what all that means. But it is a very interesting painting. Now we got one of my favorite, Pablo Picasso. This is called Yo Picasso. He did that when he was 19. This is a Blue Period Picasso. This is after he suffered the loss of his sister and his best friend, and he was having a very trying time. I think that comes across in this painting. This is right before he starts Cubism. This is in his African movement. That is an early Cubist portrait, and that's one of the last paintings he ever did. So that kind of tells the story there. You can almost see the skull as he knows his time is running out. Henri Matisse Lee, another French phenomenon, really responsible for kind of artists starting to use color expressively. One of the artists to do that is an early painting, a later painting, and a drawing he did of himself. And he was a wonderful draftsman. I really like his charcoal work. This one's a very interesting one. Katie Kollwitz. Katie Kollwitz lost all three of her sons in World War I. I think you can see that it had a tremendous impact on her as we examine her portraits. Some surrealist self-portraits. I don't know how much you guys know about surrealism or surrealists, but these are artists that try to express feelings through painting of a dreamland or a surreal state, kind of based on the writings of Sigmund Freud and on the sleeping life. So here is Salvador Dali, probably one of the most prolific and famous surrealist artists. Here's a very surreal portrait he did of himself with multiple arms and a paintbrush that has a ribbon. You see the melting clocks, which were really famous in one of his paintings called The Persistence of Memory. And another self-portrait, very humorously called the soft self-portrait. Frida Kahlo was a Mexican artist. She's often classified as a surrealist, even though she didn't really have a lot to do with him. Just her paintings have a lot of the same qualities that you would expect to see in surrealist work. She had a very trying and troublesome life. She was hit by a bus at a very young age and had a very abusive and demanding husband. So you will see this reflected in the self-portraits that I'm showing. Of course, that is her in her wedding dress. Also kind of resembles a shattered mirror. And on her forehead, that is her husband, like I said, that she didn't always get along with very well. His name is Diego Rivera, also a very famous artist. This, I think, is very much about the pain Frida Kahlo was constantly in as she struggled with coping with life after the bus accident. And this one's called The Two Fridas. You can see that she's dealing again with the troublesome marriage with her and her husband, kind of. And I'm not gonna explain away art. I'm just gonna let you sit with it for a second. Moving on. We're going to hop over the pond and get into, actually, Frida Kahlo was over the pond, excuse me. Now we're going to talk about some modern and contemporary American portraits made by artists. Chuck Close is really the only portrait artist, but this is a guy named Norman Rockwell, uber famous. This is a self-portrait that's obviously kind of telling a story as you watch him draw his self-portrait. And if you look right here on the canvas, you can see the portraits I've shown you of Vincent van Gogh and Rembrandt and Albert Dürer. So that's kind of an interesting quality you have there. Jacob Lawrence, another favorite famous artist of mine, kind of rose to prominence during the Harlem Renaissance. Very expressive in his work. Romar Bearden, my favorite artist. He was a collage artist. I mean, he taught me how to make collages. This is a collage of him in his studio. And, of course, he's showing off a work that he just finished. Very interesting painting, or collage. Chuck Close, super hyper-realistic self-portrait there. Did that right after he got out of college, looking very real. This self-portrait is actually made out of thumbprints, if you believe it or not. That is a thumbprint self-portrait, and this is one of his more later abstracted works, which is what he became world-renowned for. Andy Warhol, very big in the pop art movement, called the 9 Andys. I think you can tell why. Here's another self-portrait he did, and another 3 Andys, where you kind of see a kind of got multiple perspective going on there too. So a little shout out to Cubism and Paul Cézanne, as well as Andy with his photography and his screen printing. Jean-Michel Basquiat, an American artist from New York, did not live a long time, had a rough life. I think you can probably see that in this self-portrait. Last guy I want to talk about is actually a Brazilian artist, but he does live in New York. He lives in the States now. His name is Vic Muniz. He's a photographer, so these are actually photographs of objects that he manipulated to make a self-portrait. If we look at the one on the left, that is actually made out of sticks and leaves. Sticks, leaves, and that he used those two things to create a self-portrait. And I don't know if you guys can tell what the one on the right is, but it goes great in milk. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you some things to think about as you think about the self-portrait that you are going to make, how you're going to make it, and the story you want to tell other people about yourself. Thank you for your time and attention, and look forward to the next video, which is a demonstration on how to use proportion, or draw stuff the right size and in the right place. Thanks, guys.